Welcome to episode 21 of the Ulysses Unlocked podcast, where we analyze Ulysses by James Joyce one page at a time. We are currently reading the Nestor episode. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment to support us.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into what is, an incredibly dense couple of pages. It's the very end of the Nestor episode, pages 27 and 28.
And it is just packed. We're at the moment where Stephen Dedalus is finishing his conversation with the headmaster, Mr. Deasy, and it really just explodes with ideas.
It really does. In this tiny space, Joyce crams in, veterinary science, economic conspiracies, some really uncomfortable bigotry, and then it all culminates in this huge philosophical showdown over the meaning of history and God.
It's Stephen basically being forced to confront everything he's trying to escape, all embodied in this one man, Mr. Deasy.
Exactly. He's physically walking out the door of his job, but mentally and spiritually, he has to fight his way out. And that fight, that's what this deep dive is all about. It's about how this pressure cooker of a conversation forges Stephen's identity as an artist.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It all starts not with a big argument, but with sound. The sounds coming from the school's playing fields.
Right. It's this seemingly ordinary moment. Stephen's done with his lesson. He's about to leave, and he just hears the boys outside playing hockey.
Just normal school sounds. You hear a shout of goal, the whirring whistle. On the surface, it's totally benign, almost happy.
But Stephen's inner monologue, his stream of consciousness, it takes that sound and it just twists it into something horrific.
Yeah, it's not a game for him at all. It instantly becomes this vision of cosmic violence.
That distortion is everything. For Stephen, nothing is innocent anymore. He hears the shouts, but his mind filters it all through this lens of impending doom, really. The battling bodies on the field, they're not just schoolboys.
No, they immediately escalate into something else entirely. The imagery he uses is, well, it's just breathtakingly violent. He sees jousts, slush, and uproar of battles, the frozen death spew of the slain, a shout of spear spikes baited with men's bloodied guts.
Wow. Yeah. Death spew. Bloodied guts. That's not just a metaphor, is it? It's a full-blown vision of hell breaking loose on a hockey pitch.
And there's a very specific reason for that level of violence, right? The context of when Joyce was writing this is so important.
Absolutely crucial. He's writing this section around 1917. World War I is just raging across Europe. The daily news is filled with these unbelievable accounts of mechanized slaughter. So Stephen's mind is making a direct, devastating connection.
Field sports are mimic warfare.
They're the training ground. This isn't just Stephen being a bit gloomy. It's a profound critique of the whole social structure, specifically that British public school ethos. These organized, aggressive games are seen as character building.
But building character for what exactly?
For war. For leading men into battle, he mentions the boys by name. Cochrane, Talbot, Armstrong. These are boys from well-to-do families. They're officer material.
And in 10 years' time, so around 1914, that's exactly where they'd be, on the front lines.
That's the tragic irony. The hockey field is literally training them in aggression, in discipline, in accepting chaos and bodily harm for a team, for a goal. It's a shocking realization for the reader that these, happy school sounds are just a prelude to something awful.
And that puts Stephen in a really difficult position, doesn't it? Because he's part of this system. He feels complicit.
Oh, massively. If the whole point of the school is to churn out soldiers and imperial administrators and to teach a version of history that justifies it all, then Stephen, just by being there, by drawing a salary, is a cog in that machine.
An unwilling one, but a cog nonetheless.
Exactly. He's teaching the history that sets the stage and, keeping order in the classroom so the boys can go out and practice violence on the field. It's this internal conflict that's tearing him up.
Which makes his final interaction with Sargent, the student he was just tutoring, so sad, really.
It really does. Mr. Deasy calls the boy's name, and Stephen's last act as a teacher, his final instruction to this pathetic boy is, "Run on, Mr. Deasy is calling you."
He's sending him back.
He's sending him back to the battlefield. Metaphorically, yes, but it feels so literal in that moment. It's him confirming his decision. He has to get out. He can't participate even passively anymore.
So that's the headspace he's in. Agitated, full of these violent images, feeling totally complicit. And that's when Mr. Deasy corners him.
Right. And Deasy is just completely oblivious to any of this. He is full of his own self-importance, just beaming with pride over this letter he's written for the newspaper.
A letter about foot and mouth disease and all things. And his first boast is, "I have put the matter into a nutshell."
And right there, the comedy begins. Because Deasy is the absolute archetype of the man who thinks he's a master of brevity, but is in fact an incredible windbag.
He even asks, I don't mince words, do I?
I mean, the irony is so thick. Stephen has to read this rambling, meandering letter full of all these digressions and historical grudges before he finally gets to the phrase, to come to the pointed issue.
It's very much like a character from Shakespeare, isn't it? Polonius in Hamlet?
Oh, it's a perfect parallel. Polonius, who famously says, brevity is the soul of wit, in the middle of this incredibly long, rambling speech. He's the tedious old counselor convinced of his own wisdom, and Stephen sees Deasy as exactly that, an old counselor.
So this comedic frame is placed around Deasy's actual argument, which isn't just about a disease. For him, foot and mouth is a symptom of Ireland's total decay.
Absolutely. He links it to everything, the collapse of all our old industries, and he starts pointing fingers at these huge historical conspiracies.
He brings up the Liverpool Ring, which jockeyed the Galway Harbour scheme. What was that all about?
So this was a persistent conspiracy theory from the mid-19th century. The idea was to make Galway a major port for ships crossing the Atlantic. Its location on the west coast is perfect for that.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the theory Deasy believes is that a powerful group of shippers in Liverpool deliberately sabotaged the project because a successful Galway would have stolen a lot of their transatlantic business. It's a classic Irish nationalist narrative of English interests actively suppressing Irish economic growth.
But the source material says this theory doesn't really hold up.
No, it seems not. Historians who've looked at it tend to conclude the project failed because of, well, bad planning, not enough money, and just general incompetence from the people running it. Not some shadowy conspiracy. But the fact Deasy clings to it tells you everything about his mindset. He sees everything through this paranoid, victimized lens.
He also throws in this surprisingly accurate prediction, though. He warns about a European conflagration.
He does, which, of course, Joyce is writing about while it's literally happening. So Deasy isn't a complete fool. He sees geopolitical risks. But all his complaints, the failed harbor, the cattle disease, a future war, they all get tied back to his main enemy.
Laissez faire.
The doctrine of non-intervention. And you have to understand, in an Irish context, those are incredibly loaded words.
Because of the famine.
Exactly. The British government's catastrophic non-response during the Great Famine in the 1840s was justified by a strict adherence to laissez faire, a philosophical reluctance to interfere with the market while millions starved or emigrated.
So when Deasy attacks it, he's hitting a very deep, very painful nerve.
He is. He's calling for the government, the Department of Agriculture, to be proactive, to intervene. And that brings us to this absolutely amazing phrase he uses. He describes the government's attitude as Pluter-perfect imperturbability.
It's unforgettable. Pluter-perfect. That's not a real word, is it?
Not standard English, no. It's a Joycean intensification. Pluperfect can mean utterly or completely perfect. Joyce seems to have added the TR to make it even more extreme. So pluter-perfect means something like a supreme, total, absolute indifference.
The government isn't just calm, they are utterly, cosmically unbothered by this potential disaster.
That's the idea. And what's so fascinating is that Joyce recycles this very specific, strange term later in the book, but in a much, much darker context.
Right. This is the key connection.
Yeah. Later on in the Oxen of the Sun episode, this exact phrase, pluter-perfect imperturbability, is used to describe God. A cold, cruel, indifferent God who devours human bodies and simply does not care about our suffering.
Wow. So Deasy's complaint about bureaucratic laziness becomes, for Stephen, a description of the universe itself.
That's the leap his mind makes. The indifference of a government department is just a small, earthly reflection of the vast, indifferent cruelty of history or God or whatever you want to call it. It's a stunning piece of intellectual layering.
Okay, so let's move from that cosmic indifference to the actual science or pseudoscience that Deasy is pushing in his letter.
Yeah, he shifts from these grand pronouncements to trying to sound very informed and very modern. He just rattles off this list of scientific-sounding terms.
Right, we get foot and mouth disease, Koch's preparation, serum and virus, percentage of salted horses, and rinderpest. Sounds impressive, but it's kind of a mess.
It is a jumble. He knows the buzzwords of bacteriology, which was cutting-edge stuff in 1904, but he's mixing things up. Koch's preparation is about anthrax. Rinderpest is another cattle disease. And salted horses refers to a failed attempt at a tuberculosis treatment.
He's like someone who's skimmed a bunch of headlines but hasn't read the articles.
That's a great way to put it. The most important bit he mentions is serum and virus. Now, that refers to a very real method of creating immunity, but the science for FMD just wasn't there yet. It wouldn't be perfected for decades.
But Deasy's whole point rests on this. He claims, with total confidence, that FMD can be cured. It is cured.
And he says it's being done regularly in Austria by cattle doctors there. He even adds this very specific piece of evidence about the emperor's horses at Mürzsteg.
And that's where his argument just completely falls apart.
It does, because historically there was no cure in 1904. His premise is built on misinformation. And that detail about the emperor's horses, it seems to be pure fiction. There are no Austrian records of any such experiments. It's exactly the kind of unverifiable detail that props up a weak argument.
But this is where the story gets really interesting, because this whole plot point, this character, is based on a real person and a real experience Joyce had.
Yes, this is one of those fantastic moments where Joyce's life bleeds directly into his art. Deasy says his source is his cousin, a Mr. Henry Blackwood Price.
And Joyce actually knew a man named Henry Nicholas Blackwood Price when he was living in Trieste.
He did. And here is the absolute ticker. The real Blackwood Price really did ask Joyce to help him publicize a supposed cure for foot and mouth disease. He wanted Joyce to find an Irish MP to champion the cause.
So Joyce himself was asked to do the exact same thing that Deasy is now asking Stephen to do, to be the messenger for this questionable scientific claim.
That's the beautiful irony of it. Joyce later refers to himself in the novel as the bullock-befriending bard for his efforts. He didn't just write about this, he lived it. He even wrote an editorial for the Freeman's Journal in 1912.
The same newspaper Deasy wants to be published in. What was Joyce's article about?
It was called Politics and Cattle Disease, and it was a sharp argument against an English embargo on Irish cattle. Joyce argued the embargo was really about economic protectionism, not genuine fear of the disease.
So Joyce's own involvement was actually quite politically savvy, much more so than Deasy's rambling letter.
Far more sophisticated. But the core impulse defending Irish agriculture, from what they saw as foreign interference, is the same. It creates this really complex portrait. We see Deasy as this pompous, prejudiced old man, but he's also driven by a motive that Joyce himself understood and even acted on.
It adds a layer of sympathy, even as Deasy is about to descend into something much darker.
Exactly. And that descent begins, as it often does, with an attempt to sound educated and important.
He tries to elevate himself with a classical illusion. He compares himself to Cassandra.
Right. The prophetess who is cursed never to be believed. Deasy sees himself in that role, shouting his warnings about economic doom while the indifferent authorities just ignore him.
But he immediately undercuts himself with this really crude misogynistic comment. He says Cassandra was betrayed by a woman who is no better than she should be.
And that phrase just lowers the whole tone. No better than she should be is such a loaded moralistic way to talk about a woman's sexuality. He can't even discuss a classical myth without injecting this kind of resentful judgment. The text implies he's talking about Helen of Troy.
This slide, from economic theory to classical misogyny, it's the perfect lead-in for his final paranoid rant.
It is. He moves from blaming bureaucracy to blaming a conspiracy. He talks about intrigues and backstairs influence, and then he gets to the heart of it. He raises his finger and says it.
England is in the hands of the Jews, in all the highest places. Her finance, her press.
And they are the signs of a nation's decay. Wherever they gather, they eat up the nation's vital strength. It's just a chilling moment, a perfect encapsulation of the anti-Semitic bile of the era.
And to be clear, this wasn't just some fringe idea. This was a widespread ideology in 1904 Europe.
Oh, absolutely. The source material labels him a paranoid and a bigot, and for good reason. His words echo the major anti-Semitic theories of the time. The idea that Jewish people controlled finance and the press was a cornerstone of modern political anti-Semitism.
Where did they come from specifically?
You had thinkers in Germany, like Wilhelm Marr, arguing that Judaism was a force undermining the nation. And in France, the Dreyfus Affair was fueled by newspapers that relentlessly pushed the conspiracy that Jews had a secret international loyalty that superseded their national one.
And this fear was even starting to shape policy in Britain.
Yes, with things like the 1905 Aliens Act.
Yeah.
It was a direct response to fears about Jewish refugees fleeing pogroms in Russia. The underlying anxiety was exactly what Deasy says, that they were a threat to the nation's vital strength.
So potent about Deasy's version of this is how he mixes that modern political paranoia with ancient religious hatred.
It's a toxic cocktail. He complains about Jew merchants, which is straight out of medieval financial resentment, and then he immediately follows it with a theological charge. They sinned against the light, the ancient accusation of deicide.
But Stephen's response to the merchant stereotype is just. It's so simple and logical, it completely deflates the bigotry.
It's a brilliant moment of cool reason. He just says, a merchant is one who buys cheap and sells dear, Jew or Gentile, is he not? He refuses the ethnic premise entirely. He brings it back to a universal economic principle.
There's this great visual detail here, too. As Deasy gets more passionate and aggressive, his eyes come to blue life as they pass a broad sunbeam. He's literally lit up by his own fire.
While Stephen remains in the shadows, skeptical. And that internal resistance goes even deeper. He doesn't just argue back, he creates this sympathetic counter-image in his own mind.
Of the Jewish merchants at the Paris Stock Exchange.
Yes, at the Bourse. And he sees them not as sinister figures, but as human. He notes their gold-skinned hands, their gabble, their ill-fitting hats. But most importantly, he sees their awareness.
He says they knew the rancors massed about them and knew their zeal was vain.
That vain zeal is key. Stephen perceives that they understand the futility of it all, that their patience to heap and hoard is a response to a long history of persecution, and that they know deep down that time surely would scatter all. He sees in them a tragic historical wisdom that Deasy is completely blind to.
And to Deasy's final theological jab, that they sinned against the light, Stephen's response is just 2 words.
Who has not?
Which is just a total rejection of the premise.
Yeah.
He universalizes sin. If that's the standard, we're all guilty.
It's the perfect setup for the final philosophical clash. Stephen has dismantled the economic, the scientific, and the bigoted arguments. Now he has to take on history itself.
Right. This is the climax. After all this, Deasy's prejudice and his warped view of the world, Stephen finally delivers this defining statement. It's his personal thesis.
It is. It's the line that so many people know from Ulysses. History is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake.
It's such a powerful image, not a story, not a lesson, a nightmare.
And you have to remember, writers at the time, Henry James, Yeats, they were all using this language of nightmare to describe the horror of World War I. For Stephen, history isn't a story of progress. It's a cycle of violence, of ethnic and religious hatred, of colonial oppression. And his job as an artist is to find a way to wake up from it.
But he immediately recognizes how hard that is. He thinks, what if that nightmare gave you a back kick?
That back kick is reality. It's the reminder that the past isn't past. It's active. Deasy's antisemitism, the coming war, Ireland's colonial status, that's the nightmare kicking back. Stephen has to find his truth not in the past, but somewhere else.
And Deasy, ever the Victorian schoolmaster, offers the complete opposite view.
He offers the grand, optimistic 19th century vision. All human history moves towards one great goal, the manifestation of God.
It's pure Christian historiography. History is a straight line, moving from creation to a divine endpoint.
Exactly. It's Tennyson's one far-off divine event, a promise that all this suffering has a purpose and will be resolved at the end of time.
It's a comforting thought, I suppose. But Joyce immediately demolishes it.
With sound. Always with sound. Just as Deasy says the words great goal, a real goal is scored on the hockey pitch outside, and you hear the noise crash in, hooray, aye, hooray.
The lofty theological goal is replaced by a messy, physical, real one.
And that sound is the trigger for Stephen's most radical statement. He jerks his thumb at the window, at the noise, and says, that is God.
He clarifies, a shout in the street.
This is his great philosophical lead. It's a concept of radical immanence. He is rejecting a God who is transcendent, a God waiting at the end of history. For Stephen, if divinity exists at all, it's right here, right now. It's in the raw, messy, energetic, material world.
God isn't the word, the logos. God is the noise.
That's it. He rejects Platonism. He rejects Christian theology. He later calls this God peripatetic, meaning always moving, always present in the chaos of the street. And he calls him Dio Boia.
God the hangman.
God the executioner. It's an unbelievably shocking and blasphemous idea for the time. He's saying the divine principle isn't some benevolent father figure. It's the force of reality itself, which is creative and destructive. It's the butcher and the bawd and the cuckold. It's everything.
So if God is everything, the divine is in the good and the bad, the sacred and the profane.
Yes. It means you have to accept what some Eastern religions call the two-faced nature of God. The divine force is responsible for the cheering goal on the field and for the frozen death spew of the slain. It's a terrifying, all-encompassing vision, and it's the polar opposite of Deasy's tidy, linear path to a great goal.
And this all connects back to Deasy's accusation that Jews carry darkness in their eyes.
Stephen completely inverts it. For Deasy, light is good. It's Christian truth. Stephen reclaims darkness. For him, darkness isn't evil. It's the source of mysterious, creative, metaphysical truth.
He imagines his own creative mind as a creature of darkness, a sloth of the underworld, shifting her dragon's scaly folds.
It's very much like William Blake's idea of the marriage of heaven and hell. You need the dark energy of passion just as much as you need the light of reason. Stephen is aligning himself with the thinkers who were burned for their ideas, like Giordano Bruno. He's choosing the darkness of mystery over the harsh, judgmental light of orthodoxy.
And by choosing darkness, he's also choosing an affinity with the people Deasy condemned, the dark men.
Precisely. He aligns himself with the Jewish philosopher Maimonides, the Muslim philosopher Averroes, and, most importantly for the novel, he aligns himself with Leopold Bloom, with his wine-dark hair and his dark, thoughtful eyes. His defense of Jewish people becomes part of a much larger revolt against the entire theological structure that oppresses them.
So in these few moments, Stephen doesn't just quit his job. He formulates an entire artistic and philosophical worldview.
He really does. Deasy, in his failure to be concise or accurate, accidentally gives Stephen the perfect foil. He forces Stephen to define himself against everything Deasy represents. The nightmare of the past is rejected, and the divinity of the present chaotic moment is affirmed.
It's just incredible how much is going on here. The hockey game, the cattle disease, the economic theories, the bigotry, it all collides to produce this profound philosophical statement.
And the key takeaway for you listening to this is that none of it is accidental. Deasy's paranoia is the perfect catalyst for Stephen's rebellion. The whole scene is this perfectly engineered chain reaction that helps Stephen, at least in his own mind, begin to wake up from that nightmare.
We began this deep dive with a hockey game that was really a preparation for war, and we've ended with Stephen defining God as a shout in the street. So if God really is in everything, the chaos, the energy, the beauty, and the horror of the now, what kind of responsibility does that put on us?
Well, I think if you accept that idea of radical immanence, that the divine is in the goal and in the death spew, then you can't wait for some far-set goal or some external force to fix things. The work of waking from the nightmare of history has to start right now by engaging with the full, complex, and often terrifying reality of the present moment.
That is a very intense, but a very compelling challenge to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Until next time, keep exploring.